So it's saying the solution is here to look at life differently. You may have situations in your life that you consider negative, but we don't have to dwell on them. We could be happy no matter what. Walk through the valley of death and the world around you is caving in. You could still, it's your perception. Everything has to do with your perception. That's the fourth dimension. That's the spiritual awakening. When I realize I don't have to react to what everybody's saying or doing. So it is possible to have, okay, we know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. So you may have, okay, here they're talking about the women, but if we're men too, or whatever it is, or whoever, right? We can have these unhappy situations. A lot of times, they'll believe me, it's in our mind. But here these women obviously had a real situation, but it's telling they can be happy. They don't have to, look, we're always going to have things in our life that are going to trouble us, but we can be happy. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband, okay? This practical application. We go around trying to control and tell everybody else. In the book here, it talks about if everybody else would only behave and do what I wanted them to do, they would be happy, we'd be happy, life would be great. But it never worked out that way. The more we step on people's toes, they retaliate and want to come back at us. So they're saying to the wives, you can be happy. So they really, to me, what they're saying is the joy and happiness is in here. All these things around us, we can observe them, but we don't have to emotionally get involved and relate to them, because the real truth is in here. It's not what somebody said, what somebody did. When we find the truth will set you free, when we realize, we go around trying to manipulate the truth, trying to bring in our own truth. We go around life trying to set the stage and trying to get things. But the real truth is that all these things, when I get centered, I pray or meditate, these things really don't matter. They really don't matter. They really don't. And the worst things that happen to us in our lives, a lot of us got into these 12-step programs, right? So here you go. So we could look at, it says in the book, meet calamity with serenity. So we could be unhappy, but be just as serene in relation to the amount of unhappiness we have. On the next paragraph here, and this is people around us, bosses at work, co-workers, anybody in the clerk in the store, somebody cuts off on the highway, our husbands, our children, our wives, whatever it is in our life, it says here in this third paragraph on page 111, be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life, though your husband continues to drink. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. If we go on to page 116, and it goes on the second paragraph, it says, we have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. Do you hear that? Lived on a spiritual plane. We're living on the human plane. We're living through the ego. The ego will set us wrong every time. That's where we're living now. We're living in the lower levels of thinking. We're into the resentment, anger, the 7 deadly sins. Okay, the food gluttony obviously is one of them. We're letting the material flesh things run our lives. We were created, look, I'm convinced we were created perfect in the way that when we were born, we were created to be happy, joyous, and free. Look at little children. Until they start thinking about the ego and getting involved on that level, they're really happy. So the whole thing is we can be, this happiness is always in there. We just block it out. So it's saying here we can be in that spiritual plane, realizing the joy and happiness and the God consciousness within us, right? It's the source. It's in there all the time. We bury it. It says in our book, we bury it with the everyday things and worrying about everything we have to do today, right? And what people are going to say, what they're going to do. But we always talk in this program, the light switch coming on. You want the light switch to come on? All of a sudden, just have that spiritual awakening where you realize that all of these things and thoughts, you can observe them, but there's no need for them. There's no need for resentment or anger. When we have that different perceptions, telling the wives here, look on them as sick people, very sick people. So when we look at life and we see and we have compassion, it's going to talk about that here. Before I say those words, that's the solution. But let me read on here. We found that, like it's on page 116, like everyone else, we were afflicted with pride, one of the 7 deadly sins, right? Self-pity, again, talking about the self, vanity, and all these things which make up self-centered person, the ego, right? We're coming, you know why? The reason we do is because we were taught that. When we grew up, we were taught we had to be better than other people. We had to get better grades, better in sports. We had to have, be successful, money. This is where we were brought up. We were brought up with the ego, the self, In order to find the self, you have to lose the self. Once you're done with the ego and done with the old self, like I always say, Bob's my problem. It is. Once you forget the self, and these steps, that spiritual awakening, step 12 talks about that. That spiritual awakening, again, I always say this involves, these steps are all the religions and philosophies of the world. It's not just, again, I always say, some people say it's a cult or whatever. No. If you read the first 164 pages of this big book, if you pick up any religion, Eastern, Western, any philosophical, ancient Greek, whatever you want, it's all in here. And the whole purpose with these religions is to get out of the self. Because the world there's energy around Eastern, Western philosophy, feeling that energy, but we can't do it because we're using that intellect. God gave us this flight or fright response, the intellect, to use, again, like I say, to get on a Zoom meeting, yes, but we use it to figure out our lives. We can't. Can we figure out the miracle of the universe? Can we figure out anything, how the body functions, or one cell on the body? So why are we trying to figure out all these little incidences and every little plans and designs, they call it, right? I'm always, like I say, planning the past and regretting the future. When we're in the eternal present, and when we're here and we're centered, it's like we won the lottery every day. So we no longer have to be upset with people and situations. So it says here, so it's going on to say on page 116, God can solve the age-old prison of alcoholism, as I read already, and our other problems would be solved. But let's go to page 118. Okay. Here's what I wanted to get to. Here's a solution. This is called the watchwords. I don't know how many people know this, but I know many times I ask people about this. They're not, they don't know what the watchwords are. These are the watchwords on page 118. Patience, tolerance, understanding, love are the watchwords, right? Patience, tolerance, understanding, love. Okay? That's what the watchwords are. But that's not only the watchwords, that's the truth. The truth is that when we get upset with people, and when we're in anger, resentment, fear, the 7 deadly sins, that's coming from a lower level of thinking. That's not what the God in us, the God creator, the spirit of the universe, and that spirituality is all about. That fourth dimension is when we get out of the ego. Ego's going to set you wrong every time. So anytime we have these things, it's telling us a solution. So these wives, they show them that this is the truth. So when somebody, their husband's acted, or in your life, your husband, or the wives, or whatever it is, act in a certain way, it tells us we can have this patience, tolerance, understanding, and love. I don't have to try to do it, because when we have this consciousness, it's all about understanding the truth from the false. The truth will set you free. In other words, when I'm angry at somebody, there is no truth to that. It's coming from me and my perception. 10 people could be in a room, 9 of them will have a different perception and like the person. It's all a perception. Our perception is what society told us. So do we want to be a slave to our perceptions? And again, going to the food, okay, always go to the food. Our perception of the food, okay, is what's delegated by the corporations in there. You ever see all the commercials today, all the advertising, internet, and everything, you go down the highway? It's all a big lie. They're drug pushers, Would you go listen to the crack dealer on the corner, the heroin dealer? Would you listen to them? So why do you subject yourself and children? Actually, this should be illegal. If the drugs are illegal, more people, a lot of people unfortunately die from alcohol and a lot of devastation and from drug abuse. But do you realize that the amount is much, much more, and all the disease and all the misery that comes from the food? Not only that, not only the physical pain, but again, when we're talking here about the addiction and making it a material thing, when it's all about the food, we can't, you're eating in your car, you're driving down the highway, you're thinking of the food. You can't, it's always about, you go to an affair and so we want that change, it's perception change, that clarity. The clarity is that it's not all about the food.